Hi, everyone. So my name's Carrie Lee. I work at the Career Planning Development Center here in the St. Louis campus for Webster. So today we're just going to talk about career exploration strategies. So kind of go through some different things to think about as you're exploring careers, and then also different resources to do some research as well. So if you have questions at any point, please just put that in the chat, and then I'll also have some time at the end for other questions as well. So when you're thinking about the career development process in general, you really always want to start with kind of doing that self-assessment and thinking through, who are you? What's important to you? What do you care about? What are you good at? All of those kind of different pieces to then be able to better figure out where are you going? What are your particular short-term and long-term career goals? And what are the actual action steps and things that are going to help you get there? So as you're kind of thinking through that first phase and learning more about yourself, know that career exploration and career management is a lifelong journey. It's very common that people change jobs, they change careers. So it's not something that most people decide on, and it's a one-time decision, right? The best thing you can really do for yourself is to just make informed decisions as much as you can. Nobody knows exactly what's going to happen. Obviously, things like the pandemic, they can cause a lot of shifts in the workplace, in the job market. That's not always something that you can anticipate, but you can just make the best decisions with the information you have. And so really, when you're kind of thinking about that self-assessment, there's sort of four core areas that we always talk about. So, what's your personality, your values, your interests, and your skills? So, we'll talk about each of those in a minute. The other piece that might be something to think about personally is kind of that idea of aptitude and ability. So for some people, there are certain things where it just comes easier to them. Maybe you're somebody that you've always really been good at the math, the sort of quantitative pursuits, and that's just something that comes easier to you than other things. Um, there's a very difficult way to actually measure things like aptitude or ability in reality, because honestly, some of it is just how much work do you want to put in? Like, there are things that you may enjoy doing that you may have to work a little bit harder to learn, and that's okay, right? It's kind of up to you and what makes sense to you. So it might be something to think about that if you've always really struggled with math, it doesn't mean you couldn't be an engineer, but that would be something that you would likely have to put a lot more work into. We do offer several career assessments in our office, so I'll mention a couple of them. So there are some that are just on our connections page that I'll share with you, so you can take them at any point, for things like career values or to learn about your career interests and different jobs that might be related to those. We also offer a few other ones that focus on strengths, interests, and then we also offer the Myers-Briggs type indicator, which is more looking at personality. So there's some career correlations with that. If that's something you're ever interested in doing at any point, I would suggest just making an appointment, and then we can kind of talk through if that makes sense for you to do one of those, if that's going to kind of help give you more information, because they can be really good as opportunities to reflect and think through your own kind of personal areas. But at the end of the day, it's not going to say this is what you should do for the rest of your life. It's just kind of a starting point to say, based on your responses, these are things that we might think that you would enjoy more, might be a better fit, but no assessment is 100% accurate. So in terms of thinking through personality, personality is something that is typically pretty stable over a lifetime. So if you're somebody that is really extroverted, that's often something that tends to be a facet throughout your lifetime. It is something that you want to think about, because you can be successful in any type of role, but you might find things that you gravitate to more. So if you're somebody that is really extroverted, you love talking to people, that's where you get your energy, you like being on a team, and your role is remote and you do work and you don't actually talk to anybody, but maybe once a week in a meeting, that might be something that impacts how satisfied with your career. So it is something that you want to think about both in terms of kind of that energy. So, do you enjoy more of that introspection, kind of working on your own? Do you like working with others? Do you like a lot of structure in your job where you have very clear tasks? There's very clear deadlines for what you want to do. Are there things where you really enjoy more spontaneity? So you like being able to work at your own pace and maybe have these are things you should be working on, but not necessarily um, those specific time frames of you have to do X, Y, and Z every day in your work. You may have a little bit more opportunity for sort of creativity in your role. So those are the types of things that you might want to think about. If you have had some experiences before in, jobs, volunteering, things like that, that might also help you consider as well what sorts of things you enjoy and not so much in terms of that work style. So, career values are really just those principles that help you figure out what is most important to you in life. So, there's really no right or wrong. Everybody is going to have different opinions, and it is something that may shift throughout your life. So, when you are younger, you might not care as much about, work flexibility because you're sort of just on a traditional schedule. That's fine with you. If you end up having kids and then you have to arrange, childcare and transportation, that may be something that is a lot more important to you in a job down the road where you say, I really need a role where I can be flexible, to fit those timelines with your kids and things. So those career values, those could be things like, having a lot of flexibility in your schedule, having more autonomy in your role where you get to make more decisions versus just being told, okay, you have to do these particular things. Maybe you like having a really secure job where you feel like this is something where you don't have to worry so much about being laid off. It's a very consistent job, industry. Maybe you really care the most about salary potential, and that's kind of what's driving you, or maybe more of that personal ethic. So if you feel like this is a job or this is a company where I feel like I'm doing some good in the world, I feel like this aligns, maybe that's what you care about most at the end of the day. So again, just kind of thinking through what's a better fit for you. And on our page, we do have a link to the life values inventory. So there are others, but that's just one example if you want to kind of go through some more of those values and rank. In terms of your interests, this is one of the most important pieces that people tend to talk about. The more that you find some alignment between your career and your interests, it generally correlates to more career satisfaction, which makes sense, right? If you enjoy the work that you are doing at some level, you're probably going to be happier every day. So there is, again, no true right or wrong answer, but you might want to think about, what are your interests? What do you enjoy doing? What do you like learning about? Are there particular classes that you've enjoyed more than others? And what feels like interests that you want to pursue career-wise versus interests that might be more hobby related. So for some folks, they may have different interests that they like doing that. That's an enjoyable way to spend their time, but it's not necessarily what they want to pursue for their career. Maybe if you really enjoy knitting, that's something you like to do in your free time, but it doesn't mean that you necessarily want to monetize that and have an Etsy shop and sell your work or something. So, just kind of think through what feels like a better fit for you. And also, it is something where sometimes merging those hobbies in your career is an option, and it might be something that kind of opens up doors down the road. So most people, if you're graduating school, you did an English or creative writing degree, probably being a full-time novelist is not the most realistic thing at the moment. But it doesn't mean that you can't work on novels, join a writer's group so you have a consistent structure, you have an opportunity to get feedback. And as you get success, that may be an option to say this is something you can focus on because you have been able to make that a financially meaningful role for you. And for some people, having kind of deliverables in that set time frame might also impact your enjoyment as well. So if that's something where you feel like, yeah, I enjoy being creative, expressing myself, but if I had to do this every day on a specific timeline or do work for clients that isn't really the type of work I like to do, but it's lucrative, just consider what that would mean for you personally. And then skills is really the other piece. And so those are things that can be developed, enhanced. So it's not really a static, your skills are what they are. But are there types of things you do really well at? Do you feel like you've always been really great at communication and writing or presenting or, things like that? If you feel like there are certain areas where you tend to learn skills more quickly, you stand out more, that may be another way to connect those skills as well to say, does this align with the careers you're thinking about or potentially making a shift down the road? So if you've had some experience and you realize maybe you enjoy the industry or the type of work you do, but maybe there's a better role that would focus on your skill sets a little better. As I mentioned earlier, it is very common for folks to have different roles or to have kind of different career changes throughout their lifetime. Is a deliverable the same thing or similar to a boundary? So, what I would say a deliverable is like a specific work product. So, for instance, if you're somebody that is an artist, and so if you have paintings and you say, oh, okay, I have these 4 commissions, so I'm working on these 4 paintings this month, right? So that's kind of what I would say in that sense. And so that may be something where having that specific, you have to do this in this time frame might be something that is more stressful for some folks. So hopefully that answered your question. So there are always going to be new jobs that are created, while others can change over time or they may become obsolete. So there are things where, for instance, jobs that have to do with AI or machine learning, they didn't really exist 30 years ago. And obviously, that's something that a lot of companies are going in on and creating new roles. So, again, you can't always predict every one of those pieces, but having that adaptability and having that interest in particular areas can kind of help keep you on top of the market because there's always going to be different things. Stenographers are people who often work in courtroom settings, and so they'll do like live transcriptions for people. That's something where there are certainly AI and different software programs that will automatically transcribe and create captioning or dialogue, but those jobs haven't totally gone away because they do have particular value. And so that's something where, again, it's always good to actually look at information and look at data because you might make some assumptions that aren't always accurate. And I would always suggest to kind of keep an eye on those labor market trends, but to not solely make your decisions on that. If you're just deciding on a career because you think that nursing is a job that is projected to grow, there's a lot of opportunities there, and you don't actually have any interest or you don't enjoy the work, your skills aren't really aligned, that's maybe not the best option for you in the long run. Because if those market change, things like the computer science, IT, AI impact, those are all things that are changing that job market right now. So if you just pick something because of that labor market, it may not always be a good long-term choice. And ultimately, just focus on the things that you can control. Like none of us can control the unemployment rate in the country, how many jobs are posted, things like that. But you can control what you do, the skills you're working on, things like that. So this was kind of retrospective data. So folks from the baby boomer generation had an average of 12.7 jobs over their career. And obviously, most people don't stay with a company for as long of a time. It's anywhere between sort of a year and a half to 5 years, depending on your age bracket. So it is something where you all will probably have more jobs than that in your lifetime. For the current labor market, the unemployment rate has gone up a little bit. So it hasn't necessarily been drastic. As you can see, it's gone from 3.7% to 4.3 over the last 2 years. So, it is a little bit of a noticeable change, but at the same time, it's not anything like that early COVID timeframe or kind of the 2008 recession, things like that. So as we're kind of talking about some other ways to research careers, explore those, there has also been research about what has helped people make better decisions about their career journeys. And so the consistent things that come up are when people have the opportunity to write about, what they're interested in, what are their career goals, being able to talk to somebody one-on-one and get feedback, whether that's somebody like in my role as a career coach or a mentor or a faculty advisor or a supervisor at your job, having that world of work information. So, what's the unemployment rate like? Are jobs growing in this area? Are they declining? And then actually seeing people do the work every day. So if you are, doing an internship and your boss is a financial analyst, getting to see them do their work and having questions, being able to talk through that is going to help you with that support and modeling to get a better sense of this is what this job is like day to day, and if that's something that you're still interested in. So as you're doing career research, you know, obviously you can learn about things like sort of the labor market, but also learning more about what are different roles within a career field. If you're a finance major, there's a variety of things you can do with that, right? You can work in different settings, different types of companies. So maybe you are working at a bank, maybe you're working more of a financial planning or advising role. Maybe you're working for a particular company, managing the finances for that. So, what are those different common roles that are out there? What are ways that you can advance? Because some careers, there's a lot of steps that you can sort of go up. And for some, it may be much more flattened. If you're a teacher, there's opportunities for you to gain more experience and maybe you are in charge of curriculum for your department. Maybe there's leadership roles, but for most people, either you are a teacher unless you decide to move up and pursue a role like a principal or something like that. So there's not necessarily as many in between roles as there would be for some other professions. You can also better understand how to be a competitive applicant. So knowing what is the appropriate degree level, if you want to be a physical therapist, that's something where you're going to have to do a graduate degree to be eligible for that. If you have other roles, you maybe don't necessarily need to pursue a graduate degree, or it's something that some people do later on in their careers, but not everyone. If there are particular experiences that would help you stand out or get you more relevant qualifications for employers. So if you're looking at particular careers, so maybe you're thinking that You want to be a data analyst, for instance. The things that you want to look at are, what are the job duties and responsibilities? So what would this person do every day at their work? What are those educational requirements? For some jobs, it might be a bachelor's degree. If it's a data scientist role, they might be asking for a PhD. So understanding, the distinctions. For some careers, they might have some type of licensure or certification. So, to be a CPA, and that's something where you have to have an accounting degree. You have to have a certain number of hours. You have to sit for an exam, right? So that's a very specific process versus to work in marketing, you don't necessarily have to have a particular degree. It certainly might be helpful if you have more marketing communications back work, but there's not a requirement for that in the same way. What are skills? So one of the sites that I'll show you, ONET, kind of breaks down here are some common skills or software that are used in careers. What are ways to get experience? What is the common salary? Is that something that is going to fit with your personal needs? If the jobs are projected to grow, decline, all of these types of factors can help. Obviously, sometimes certain industries are focused in particular parts of the world. If you're in acting, there are certainly jobs all across the country, but a lot of opportunities are probably going to be centered in places like California or New York. So that might impact, your long-term goals. So we'll kind of talk through each of these a little bit more, but I will share this presentation with you all so you have these clickable links for later. So ONET is a really great site, and I will show you this really quickly. For ONET, it is a government website. So the Bureau of Labor Statistics is where you can find information about like the unemployment rate, different kind of career statistics. And so there's a lot of great ways that you can filter. So let me switch screens really quickly. So if you're looking at ONET, you can always just type in a particular keyword. You can also use other filters as well. So for instance, if you have a sense of kind of the industry you want to work in or kind of the job family, so maybe you know that you're interested in business, but you're not quite sure which area, that will generate, here's different roles that might be relevant for that. So if you click on a particular title, it will give you kind of a brief description, common job titles. So if you're looking for those roles on a job board like LinkedIn or Handshake or something, those would be good keywords. Particular technologies, software, skills that they have. What's the degree level? So for this one, it's usually going to be beyond high school diploma, but it doesn't necessarily always require a, bachelor's degree. You can look at the different kind of work environment. You can also break down salary trends by state. So for instance, if you look at any particular state, you can also look at, here's kind of different metro areas. So depending on the job, some may have kind of more information than others. And so that's just a good way to find out some kind of basic details, things like that. So again, if you want to search for a particular role, you can just type in. And what I will also say is that this is based on tons of data and survey information. So for some careers that are newer, so things that are sometimes more in the tech space, they're not always going to be quite as up to date as some other roles, because there's not 20 years of data about social media managers. So sometimes they're going to be a little bit broader, but it's often a good starting point. The Occupational Outlook Handbook is another site. It's very similar to ONET, but it's just kind of more organized by career clusters. So, things like education or business. So that I would say if you're kind of maybe a little bit more broad, you're not quite sure what you're wanting to explore or looking for, that can be another good site. The Bureau of Labor Statistics I mentioned, probably a lot of it is very detailed and more than most people ever care to know. But if you are looking for things like unemployment rate, job growth by industry, that's always the sort of best place to go to. You can also find information through different library databases. So at Webster, you can access those, but also if you are a member of your local library, like the St. Louis County Library, for instance, they often will have very similar ones. So you might have come across some of these if you've had to do, research on a company for a particular assignment for a class, but the St. Louis Business Journal is going to have some more local information, so you can access that through the Webster Library database. The IBIS World, ProQuest have some kind of overviews about different companies and different industries. So if you are maybe really wanting to target a particular company, you can find more information about, if they're publicly traded, like what's their revenue, who are the leadership folks at that organization, what do they do, what services do they offer. That IBIS World, like I said, has some kind of different industries, your common employers. So just another way to research if you want to. What can I do with this major is not necessarily a Webster specific resource, but it is one that has a lot of common majors. So, film and TV production might not be on there, but things like computer science or English or psychology. So this one just shows different pathways. So if you look at psychology, for instance, it'll kind of detail, here are some common directions that people go with that. Here are resources to other sources of information like professional associations or job boards that are more specific to that career. And so this one is a subscription service. And so it's free for you to access, but you just have to click through from our page. So if you go to our connections page, then this is where you can access it. So all you have to do is just click the link here. It'll take you to the site. So again, they have kind of different groupings. And so then you can see here are these particular degrees. So if we look at criminal justice, for instance, it will go through, here are some different areas. So folks that go into social services, maybe they pursue law school, law enforcement, business, etc. So again, if you're just kind of thinking about maybe you're set on a particular major, but you're not really sure what all you could do with that, that's a really easy way to just get some ideas, kind of get a start with that. Another thing I would always suggest is just looking at job boards. So these could be things like Handshake, LinkedIn, Indeed, Glassdoor, any of those big job boards. And, just look at current job postings because that is always going to be the most up-to-date information of if companies are saying, here's the salary range for this position, here's what we're currently requiring, here are the job responsibilities. That's often sometimes the easiest way to get a sense of, are there roles that you feel like would be more interesting to you? Do you feel like those are things that you've learned about in your degree program you could do with some training? Or do you feel like there are pieces that maybe you need a little bit more education experience with? So that might be something to focus on building in terms of your skill sets. Some of these sites, so like ZipRecruiter and Zippia and Indeed, they will have some kind of career advice and information. So for instance, they'll say, oh, based on all these data analyst job postings, here, the common skills that they're asking for, here are common salary ranges. So again, it just kind of maybe gives you a little bit more up-to-date information. There's sites like Glassdoor where people can share their salary when they worked at a particular company or their reviews of working there, having an interview there. So sometimes that is also a good way to just get a sense. People are usually going to share information if they feel really strongly about something, whether good or bad. But if you're noticing trends, that may be something that is helpful to you if everyone's saying, oh, this was a really great place to work. The salary was always really low, and that's why I left. So LinkedIn, obviously, you can use that as a job board to look at job postings, kind of do some research that way. But you could also look for information about employers and then for more kind of connections to build your network. Handshake, obviously, probably you all have used a little bit just in terms of signing up for this workshop and finding it. So any of our events, we post on Handshake. Employers can also host events. So a lot of the Fortune 500 companies have a profile on Handshake. Doesn't necessarily mean they post every single job they have on there, but they will do recruiting because Handshake is really geared towards university students and new graduates. So, for instance, Bank of America might have a session about careers in finance at their company. They might share more information about their recruiting process, what they're looking for. So I would always recommend you check those things out because sometimes that can give you a better sense, just either kind of exploring different industries or professions. You can also, search for particular companies, find more information about them, access Going Global. There's also a way that you can message folks. So both Webster students and alumni, but also students from other universities. So, kind of a LinkedIn in that sense as well. So Going Global is another subscription one. So again, you just have to click on the specific link to access it for free, and you can do that through Handshake. Going Global just has information about job searching in different parts of the world. So there are some different city guides for the United States. So like if you're wanting to move to New York, there's some information on industries, common job boards, things like that. But there's also information for job searching in other countries around the world. So it's not going to be every place, but there is some information on, what does a resume look like in Germany versus, somewhere like Taiwan. So there's also information here for international students of companies that have hired folks on OPT, that have done H-1B visa applications to sponsor employees. So, depending on what your kind of background is, that might be another resource as well. Some of you all might have also heard of professional associations. These are often really important if you're pursuing a career that is more licensed or certified. So for instance, if you're, a teacher, a counselor, an accountant, they often have information about, what are programs that are accredited, how would you become a CPA, things like that. So they can sometimes be good sources of information as well. Like in the past, CompTIA has often had information about here's different careers in IT and, a little bit of an overview. So that might be helpful if you're trying to figure out what are different jobs that you could pursue with your IT management degree. Some information you may just be able to publicly access. It's free to anyone. Some might be behind a paywall. So if it's a situation where you have to be a member, it may or may not be worthwhile for you, right? Some professions are going to be more useful if you're actually an employee full time. Your company might pay for that membership fee. Some do have free or discounted rates for students. So, I would always talk with other folks in your industry, maybe ask a professor if they feel like it would be worthwhile if that's something you're considering. But know that there are sometimes different student fees. So if you are graduating soon, there's something that you want to be a part of, you might get a price break on that if it's something you want to look at. If you're still kind of in the phase where you're deciding on your major, you're kind of starting at that point. Looking at the Webster catalog is going to have all the requirements for every single academic program here. So for majors, for both undergrad and for graduate programs, any minor certificates. So if you're still kind of trying to decide what majors you want to pursue, maybe what would be a good combination if you have a couple of different interest areas, then that's often the easiest way to start, is to just kind of go through that list, see which ones are of interest that you want to look more into, because from there, you may be able to talk more with your advisor, kind of think through what would it look like if I decided to add on a minor, or if I chose this major versus another, how would that maybe impact your time to graduation? And I was mentioning earlier, if you want to be a nurse, you have to have a degree in nursing, right? That is very specific. It's a requirement to be licensed. For most other careers, it may be helpful to have a more relevant degree, but it is not necessarily a requirement. If you want to be a financial analyst, obviously it makes sense if you're pursuing a finance degree. There are folks that have general business administration degrees and go down that career path. There's folks that have an English major and they pursued a career in finance. So that might be something that requires more work. So you might have to kind of work your way up and get more experience. So then you have that qualification versus somebody who's starting out with the most relevant major possible, but know that whatever you're choosing for your major isn't necessarily going to lock you in for the rest of your life. It is just that starting point for building those knowledge bases. So once you've kind of done some research, you feel like maybe you have kind of some things you're considering, one of the most helpful things is always just going to be to get experience. And so experience doesn't have to be paid. Internships are great. That's a really great way for you to figure out if that's a career that is going to be something you want to pursue more, but it's not the only way. And so whether it's volunteering, maybe just doing a job shadow. So if you're thinking about a different health profession career, like maybe you want to go to medical school and be a doctor, it's very common to job shadow and, see what that's like on a day-to-day basis. So it doesn't have to be a long-term commitment for you to say, oh, you know what? I realize that this is not quite what I thought it was. I was thinking about law and I realized that this isn't maybe a fit. You can also certainly do, part-time jobs. So even whether the tasks in the part-time job are exactly related to your career goals, maybe the industry is. So, if you are working more of a customer service role, but it's at a company you want to work at in the future, it's an industry you want to be in, that's also going to help you build some relevant experience and connections as well. If you join student organizations, there's a ton on campus for different areas. So maybe you're a part of the computer science club and you do some hackathons, or you're a part of, the arts coalition. And so that's an opportunity for you to do more work on your art. So those are other great ways to meet people, get experience. Things like LinkedIn Learning, you all have access to as Webster students. So they're just kind of video courses online. So if you want to learn more about how to use Photoshop or how to handle difficult conversations at work, those are, trainings that you can do at any point. Even just things from your classes, those might be relevant projects for you to get a sense of. If you're taking, that data analytics coursework, Is that something you enjoy? Do you realize that maybe this is not something that you want to pursue more of? You don't enjoy coding, you don't enjoy having to do that high level of analysis. So, those are all things that are just going to help you feel more confident in your long-term career goals. And then in terms of making connections, you know, you can always do things like informational interviews. And all that means is just having a conversation with a professional about their career path. So, for instance, maybe you find somebody on LinkedIn to reach out to and say, you know, what got you interested in your career? What was your background like? What did you major in school? Was there anything that you felt like helped you be successful? What do you find challenging about your work? And so that's just an opportunity to get that perspective from people who are doing that job every day. And so what I would always say is the easiest way to find information is if you use the LinkedIn alumni tool. So if you go to LinkedIn and you look up Webster, there's just this tab that says alumni. It's the same thing if you look up other universities. And so this just pulls in anyone with a Webster degree. So you can filter and see, where do people live, what companies do they work at, what do they do. So you can certainly use keywords as well. But if you wanted to maybe see, what are alumni that work in IT? If you want to add a filter, so maybe you are in Florida, you can select that as an option, right? And see, here are Webster alumni, here's where they work, here's these connections. So that's a really good way to find people, because oftentimes people might be a little bit more likely to respond to you if you have something in common, or you say, oh, I see that you're a Webster alumni. I'd love to learn more about your experience, your career path. And, if not everybody responds to you, that's okay. But that's something where those connections can help you just get a better understanding of careers, as well as potentially open up some doors. So maybe they are hiring at their company, maybe they have an internship program. So those can be things you pursue. So this idea of warm and cold connections just relates to whether or not you already know them a little bit. So a warm connection would be somebody that you have a mutual connection with. So for instance, maybe, I have a family friend that works at a company and I'm really interested in learning more about what they do. So that's a warm connection because they already know who I am. They may not know me very well, but that's something where they're probably much more likely to kind of reach out to me, versus a cold connection is somebody that you don't have any connection with. If I just said, I really want to learn more about what it's like to be a data scientist, and I looked up and found somebody random to message, you know, sometimes those cold connections can be really useful as well, because obviously you're being proactive, you're pursuing that connection on your own. So really you can go either way, but sometimes those warm connections are a little bit easier to find. And, as you're continuing to kind of explore careers, you know, setting goals just helps you stay on track. So it doesn't mean that you have to have your entire life figured out yet, but, what are some small steps? If you know that, you want to pursue a career in marketing, what are some things that you could do now? So maybe that's, you want to reach out to a couple of people to try to do an informational interview before the end of the spring semester. Maybe you want to apply to some internships and see if you could find an opportunity for this summer. So, kind of think about what's something you could do right now, what's kind of that short term, and then what do you ultimately want to do? Because just breaking that down is going to help, because it's really common for people to get overwhelmed or to say, I feel like I'm making these huge life decisions about what I want to major in, what I career I want to pursue. And so if you just are kind of focusing on what do I want to do for the next 30 years, of course that's going to feel overwhelming, right? It's hard to plan something out that long because even if you do make a great effort planning, other things happen in life, right? Things shift with your priorities. So, think about the long term, but kind of focus on what are some things that you could do right now, maybe in the next year before you graduate from Webster, that's just going to help you better have a sense of what you want to do. So again, the more informed decisions you make, the more likely you are to be successful. And, be proactive. Pursuing things like internships are a great way to better explore a career, understand what that work life is like on a daily basis. But that's something that you need to be planning ahead for, right? Because they're often going to recruit a semester in advance, potentially a year in advance for some, internships at really high level companies, well-known places. So that's something that you want to make sure that you're keeping on top of because you're not necessarily always going to have somebody reminding you and say, hey, have you applied to those summer internships yet? That's something you want to make sure that you're doing right now. And as we've kind of talked through, hopefully you've kind of had some thoughts about what areas you feel like you've already done some work in, what maybe are things that you could do more to do some more research. So, what information do you still need at this point? What's going to help you get there? If you want to talk one-on-one, you're always very welcome to make an appointment with me so we can kind of talk through more specific concerns or different ideas for your career path. As I showed earlier, we have a lot of resources on our connections page. So if you go to that department's career planning and development, we have our Instagram. We post some of our, workshops and things on our YouTube page. So if you all have questions, feel free to go ahead and unmute or just put it in the chat.